Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for being here with us. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this event in the 2014-2015 series of the Chancellor's Colloquium Distinguished Speakers series. It is now in the 6th season of this series, and the Colloquium continues to bring to our campus scholars and, of course, academic leaders, policymakers, and other individuals who have distinguished themselves through their scholarship, through their work, through their outreach to the community, the impact that they've had in their lives and their careers. So we're very fortunate today to have with us Dr. Russell Berman, the Walter A. Haas Professor in the Humanities at Stanford University. As it normally how it normally goes in this series, I give a very brief introduction and, of course, wanting to thank you for being here with us. But the introduction of our speaker is going to be given by Dr. Beal. Dr. Beal is, David Beal, is the director of our Humanities Institute and the Emanuel Ringelblum Distinguished Professor of History. And he is responsible for the series. He helps us select wonderful individuals who come to our campus to really talk about higher education, the various aspects of the university, and help us as a community engage in a conversation about the opportunities and the challenges that we face as a public research institution in the 21st century. Also, the style we run this speaker series is a little more interactive. So we have the speaker who is going to introduce the topic and make a few comments. Sometimes are longer, sometimes are shorter, but we leave it up to the speaker to choose how to do this. And then we continue the discussion with the panel. So today we are going to have two moderators for this evening, Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor Ralph Hexter, and Professor of English John Marks. And we always enjoy that part of, as well as, of course, the presentation by the speaker, but we always enjoy the discussion that follows, and you will all be encouraged to participate through your questions. So thank you again, and David, please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Katehi. And before I give my introduction, let me remind everyone to turn off your cell phones. Thank you. So welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening for the conversation with Russell Berman. Our format this evening will begin with opening remarks by Professor Berman entitled Rethinking the Ph.D. in the Humanities, followed by a panel discussion with Provost Hexter and Professor Marks, and then you'll have a chance to ask questions. Allow me first to introduce Provost Hexter and Professor John Marks. Ralph Hexter is a distinguished scholar in classics and comparative literature, and as an academic leader, he has made it a priority to foster excellence across the full range of the disciplines and to promote equal opportunity, diversity, and inclusion for students, faculty, and staff. John Marks is a member of the Humanities Innovation Lab here at UC Davis and editor of the journal Contemporary Literature. With University of South Carolina film scholar Mark Garrett Cooper, he is completing a book that reveals how the problem of mass media defines the humanities in the modern research university. An author of 2 books with Cambridge University Press and numerous articles on contemporary, post-colonial, and modernist fiction, his most recent book is Geopolitics and the Anglophone Novel, 1890 to 2011. As the recent graduate director in the English department, John joined with the Humanities Institute in inaugurating a professionalization program called Ph.D. Unlimited that encourages graduate students to consider careers outside the academy. I'm now honored to introduce our distinguished guest, Russell Berman. With appointments in comparative literature and German studies, Dr. Berman is an expert on German literature and culture in the 19th and 20th centuries and on cultural relations between Europe and the United States. He has written widely on modern German and European literature and politics, as well as on issues in contemporary cultural theory, in more than 80 articles and 5 books. This includes The Rise of the Modern German Novel, Crisis in Charisma from 1986, which is regarded as one of the most important contributions to the study of 20th century literature by an American Germanist. Most recently, he has published research on the cultural phenomenon of anti-Americanism and European responses to terrorism. In addition, he has contributed broadly to national discussions about the challenges to higher education. At Stanford, he directs the Introductory Studies program for freshmen and sophomores. Formerly president of the Modern Language Association and chairman of the MLA Task Force on Doctoral Study in Modern Literature, Berman has played a leading role in the discussion around the future of graduate training in the humanities. Please join me in welcoming Russell Berman.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chancellor Katehi, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be back at Davis. I've had an opportunity to visit the campus a number of times, but I've never seen this wonderful building before, so congratulations on this addition to the campus. David, thanks so much for the kind introduction. I'm talking today about a vision for the future of the PhD in the humanities. My focus is primarily the languages and literatures, building on my experience as chair of a task force of the Modern Language Association. For those of you who don't know, the MLA is the professional association of scholars of language and literature, the largest humanities professional association in North America with about 30,000 members. I became president of the MLA in 2011. The presidency of the MLA is now held by a colleague here at UC Davis, Professor Margie Ferguson. And I'm not sure if she's here, but I want to reassure her that hi, Margie. Margie, let me tell you that the only thing better than being president of the Modern Language Association is being former president of the Modern Language Association. So there's something for you to look forward to still. I became president in 2011, but that was really at the end of a 3-year stint. In 2009, I became second vice president, such is the order of this organization. And 2009 is, as you all know, 1 year after 2008, that horrible year of the collapse of the financial markets and also a dramatic shrinking of the academic job market. This produced a kind of crisis of conscience in discussions about graduate education in language and literature and the humanities at large. Arguments were current then that students should just not go to graduate school, that programs should be shut, that we should radically reduce the cohort of students studying the humanities at advanced levels, and indeed effectively reduce access to higher education. All of those arguments seemed logical and really fundamentally wrong. And what I'm going to present today is, in a sense, the counter-argument to that logic. I believe that graduate study in the humanities, in language and literature, is a vital part of higher education, and that it has a mission, multiple dimensions that we should preserve, but we can only preserve it if we think about how it can evolve into the future. So I want to run through some aspects of this argument as it pertains to language and literature in general, with a few pieces of information, some data, not only about the national scene, but also about some aspects of what I've been able to discover at Stanford. I want to begin simply by reaffirming why this is important. Why not just shutter all of these programs? And I think there are 3 main reasons. The values cultivated in the humanities, the competencies developed in graduate education are good for societies at large. It's good for our society to have people who have been trained in the kind of extensive thoughtfulness, in the skepticism about language and the awareness of history throughout society. I wish there were more. In fact, the number of PhDs we have per capita in the United States is not very high. We're really somewhere below the middle of the list of developed countries in terms of the presence of PhDs in society. Secondly, and this is not ranked order, we have to think about PhD study as good for students. Who studies on the advanced level in the humanities? It's undergraduates who have received their bachelor's degree and are still passionate about some set of ideas, some set of material that they want to pursue further. If they don't have that passion, then they shouldn't be in the program. Of course, they have to have the capacity, they have to have the mental agility, they have to have the intelligence, but it's that passion that's crucial. And I've never heard of a PhD student who, even going on to other fields, regrets the ability to have studied the material that they love. And thirdly, I think it's right for us to say it's important for the university as an institution. Universities are about a universe of knowledge. Universities without a strong humanities dimension are diminished in their capacity to offer all the members of the university community the opportunity to learn from each other. So that's why we have to preserve this. 3 good reasons to preserve it, but we're going to have to change. We're going to have to change for several reasons. Some of these reasons have been around for a long time, but I believe that in the wake of 2008, they reached the tipping point. They reached a tipping point because of the contraction of the academic job market, because there was a recognition that the time to degree, the time that students spend in graduate school, was excessive, and because of the greater awareness of what's called the casualization of the academic workforce. The notion that most college education is delivered by faculty on the tenure track is an illusion. Alas, according to some statistics, more than 3/4 of the instructors in higher education are off the tenure track. They're adjuncts, they're lecturers, they don't have that job security. They may not be here in 3 years to write the letter of recommendation for the student they had as a freshman. That's a terrible development in my mind, but we have to take this into account when we evaluate where humanities education is going to go. Now, add to that the awareness that became acute after 2008 about the growth of student debt. For all of these reasons, we have to rethink how we run the business. This is a chart that shows the doctorate recipients in English, and you'll see the blue line is, I have to need my glasses. These are ads. Excuse me. These are the job information list is the list that the MLA develops of job openings in the field. And you see the sudden collapse after 2008. In addition, you see the green line, which is the number of jobs that are marked as tenure track jobs. Now, this isn't comprehensive. It doesn't count for all positions. Some positions aren't advertised nationally, but this abrupt change, and where the green line crosses the red line, that's where there are more PhDs coming onto the market than there were jobs available. This is a longer-term track, and I've really included it only for the far right, where you see the big collapse after 2008. One line here is for English, and the other is for the languages other than English. And you see that there was a little bit of a recovery after 2008, but really not much. And I think we have to wonder whether the trough here is the new normal. This is an interesting piece of analysis that the MLA Research Division, which, as Margie knows, is one of the strongest aspects of the association, undertook. It worked with the survey of earned degrees carried out by the Department of Education, and it shows here the percentage of students who completed their degree in 6 years or less. On the left, you have the humanities, then the life sciences, physical sciences, and social sciences. And then it's a time range from the 60s to 2010 in each case. So the question really is, why does it take, why are so why are humanities students completing in 6 years or less at such a lower rate than PhD recipients in all the other fields? The curves are similar, but that's about 10% of humanities graduate students in 6 years or less, as opposed to 40% in the physical sciences. It's the same degree. What's the difference between the humanities and the sciences that makes humanities students take so much longer? Now, one shouldn't say that it's all wrong. It might be because there are more difficult aspects of humanities learning, but it could also be that there are certain institutional habits that we in the humanities might be able to learn from our colleagues in the sciences that might allow us to use our resources more effectively, to do more justice to the time that we're asking graduate students to spend in the university and the time that, and how we faculty use our own time. Here we have, so that's the time to degree problem. We had the job market, time to degree, and here's a question of placements. The top, you see placements in tenure track versus placements in non-tenure track jobs. And what happens in after 2008 is suddenly there are more placements in the non-tenure track than in the tenure track. So that's the transformation of the employment market in higher education. At the bottom, you see a few lines that are interesting. The red line is the rise of the postdoctorate opportunity in higher education. You see it rising, and you see the orange line. Those are positions definitively outside of higher education. I think there are a couple of things to take away. That even in this data, there's clearly a long history of employment outside of higher education. That is, PhD recipients leaving the academic world and going into the private sector, going into not-for-profit, going to work for the government. It declines. I believe that that decline could be attributed in part to the rise of the postdoc. The postdoc is the opportunity for the PhD recipient to work in the university, perhaps her or his own university or another university for a year or two. Teaching, research and teaching, the mix of postdocs varies. This is much more a feature of trajectories in the sciences. There are those who say that the humanities are gradually becoming more like the sciences, where the postdoc is becoming perhaps a prerequisite for a permanent position. I don't think we're there yet. And I think that while on an individual level, receiving the postdoc can really be salutary, it's better than not having anything. On the long run, we in the humanities might run the risk of falling into the postdoc trap, where the postdoc becomes a condition of getting a regular position, which really just postpones the job security of a regular position to later in the young scholar's life. This is the same for the languages other than English. You see again the two lines crossing on the top, and you see the actually a higher rate of employment outside of the education sector altogether, 10% here. On the bottom, but nonetheless, the gradual rise of the red line, the postdocs, it's the results are the same with the numbers slightly different. So I thought I'd give you a snapshot. This is really no statistical basis whatsoever. I teach in the DLCL, the Division of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages at Stanford, effectively a modern language unit, and last year, I was sitting on the podium at our graduation ceremony, our divisional, and it begins with the head of the division calling up each new PhD and reporting on where, on what she's written her dissertation on and where she's going to be going. there were 15 PhDs who were called up, and of those there were 14 firm placements. And listening to this, I realized here I have an analysis of what I want to prove. 2 were going into tenure-track positions, but 8 were going into non-tenure track positions. Now that's just 1 year, one snapshot. I think, though, that's typical of what's going on. What's really stunning is the second bullet point from the bottom. 4 were going into the private sector. So they'd received their PhD in French literature or German literature, and they were going to work for major IT firms or to smaller startups. And these are some of the titles that they were receiving. Now, one could say that that's an anomaly. This is Stanford. It's in the middle of Silicon Valley. But I think it's telling that many students, twice as many as were going into tenure track positions, were going out into the private sector. And I believe it's very important for us in humanities departments, for us as humanities faculty members, to try to achieve much greater transparency about placement rates and career trajectories for our students, and what's more, to validate all of those career trajectories. I'll have more to say about that in a moment. This is an analysis that our Vice Provost for Graduate Education at Stanford has undertaken, looking at 2 cohorts, Stanford PhDs, 5 years out and 10 years out, and they're mixed up here. So ultimately, one would want to have a finer grained analysis, but they're mixed here, and it shows where PhDs from the different schools, humanities, business, education, social science, etc., have ended up after 5 plus 10 years. So on the far left, 77% of the humanities PhDs are working within the academy. That's a high percentage, but that's a bit deceptive, because what that includes is tenure track positions and adjunct positions and so-called alt-ac, alternative academic positions within the academy, people working in administrative positions of various sorts. What's interesting here is that students, PhD recipients in other fields are working outside of the academy at much higher rates. Now, you could say that's obvious, but it's really, from the standpoint of the humanities discussion, a discovery that that departments much like ours, with colleagues much like ourselves, are regularly sending their fresh PhDs out into the world. And this is a discovery because in much of the humanities, the lore among faculty remains that the valid future of a new PhD is exclusively as another professor. That is empirically not the case. We know that here, even here, 25% of the recipients of the degrees in the humanities aren't in the academy anymore. And it's probably many more if we were looking at only the 10-year out cohort and not just the 5-year out cohort. It's important for us to recognize this because we want to keep the doors open for students who are passionate about advanced study in these fields, but we have to be brutally frank that it's not only to become future university professors. It's in order to do many different things, just as recipients of PhDs in the humanities have been doing many things for a long time. Now, this brings me to the task force report of the Modern Language Association that's now about a year old. Just going to give you some highlights if you're interested in reading the full document. It's on the website of the MLA. Our framing principles for the task force were that the future of the PhD in language and literature fields depends on maintaining excellence. There's no concession there. There's no compromise there. But maintaining excellence doesn't mean maintaining all the structures and patterns that have prevailed in the past. On the contrary, in order to maintain excellence, we have to evolve with changing circumstances. We also were insistent on maintaining accessibility to higher education. And this is really the crux of the matter to my mind. The arguments back in 2009 and 2010 that came from the right and came from the left in a striking symmetry was that as the job market shrinks, so should we shrink the size of the cohort. Another way to say that is, as the job market shrink, so should we shrink accessibility. So should we close our doors. So should we deny opportunity to those passionate students who want to study the material. And our answer is no. It's crucial for society and the vitality of the university and the opportunities of students to keep those doors open, which we would lose if we were to follow the suggestion of shrinking the cohort. At the same time, we want to emphasize the broad range of career paths that the humanities PhD can lead to. It's not only to become a professor. Now, I emphasize this because we heard again and again from graduate students with whom we spoke in the course of developing the task force report that there's a deep anxiety among graduate students that if they explore alternative career paths, and if their advisor finds out, their advisor will no longer see them as serious. The advisor will drop them because he or she may only be interested in training another professor. I have no way to know how often that really happens, but I do know that that discourse, that concern is widespread among graduate students. When we spoke with directors of career development centers, they told us that many graduate students in the humanities would seek them out to explore the range of possibilities that they might have in 2 or 3 years when they finish their degree. But they would only do it, they would only seek them out after ascertaining that the conversation would be fully confidential, because they didn't want news to get back to their departments. Now this, I think, is, of course they should have the confidentiality, but that level of anxiety is just intolerable. What we in the humanities have to do is sort of break that open and validate the multiple ways that fresh PhDs can use the skills that they've acquired in the course of graduate study in the academy and outside of the academy. And that's why we argue in the various recommendations that we make that departments should rethink their programs and ask to what extent do the programs serve the needs of graduate students. I have plenty of opportunities to write my articles and write my books. I have plenty of opportunities to go to conferences and pursue my crucial research interests. But when I am deciding what I want, what course I will offer, it should be functional for the structure of the program, which should be responding to the intellectual and professionalization needs of the graduate students. So these are some of the recommendations that the report makes. The rhetoric of the report is directed primarily at departments of English, departments of German, etc. It's an appeal to the faculty. We ask departments to rethink their programs. There may be aspects of the program, the structure of courses, the particular requirements, the nature of examinations, the pacing of the whole set of offerings that have just been on the books forever. And maybe they made sense once, maybe they still make sense, but maybe they don't. And maybe there'd be a way to use everybody's time more effectively in order to serve the graduate students' needs more productively and prepare them in ways that are going to meet the requirements of their own futures. I won't elaborate on each of these points, but the second bullet is particularly important. I think traditionally faculty have thought about the structure of the degree program primarily in terms of the seminars that we distinguished individuals offer to the students and a set of examination hurdles. There are skill sets that we faculty can't cultivate well among graduate students, but that graduate students should acquire. And therefore there should be, we call it paracurricular opportunities, perhaps offered in conjunction with the Humanities Center, I guess that's the model here, or with the graduate school, or with the library, and we faculty in the department should be advocates for the development of these kinds of opportunities for graduate students to acquire skills in technology, in numeracy, in management, and in multiple other areas that would be useful for their futures. We're not talking about a full set of courses. We're talking about weekend seminars. We're talking about short-term training sessions. We're not talking about anything that we would require of all graduate students, but offering graduate students a range of opportunities in order to enhance their own professionalization. I mentioned technology a moment ago, and I do believe that greater engagement with technology for humanities graduate students is a crucial part of the future development of language and literature PhDs. Some of you may know that there's a subfield within the humanities, the digital humanities, that has been a growth area in recent years. I can't predict how important this will be in 5 years, 10 years. It may well be crucially important as a bona fide research area within English, French, Spanish, and the like, using computational skills to analyze literary production in different ways. Students should have the opportunity to develop facility in this area. But students should have the opportunity to develop their technology skills more broadly, because if they go on in the academy or outside the academy, they're going to need different kinds of technological abilities that are beyond the realm of standard essay writing, which has been the primary mode of assessment in graduate literature programs. The capstone of graduate programs in the humanities, in doctoral programs across the board, is the dissertation. What the dissertation is, however, varies widely across the university. In many humanities departments, there's still the expectation of a kind of, we say, proto-book, 200, 300, 400-page coherent narrative about a literary historical question. I admire that. But in other fields that grant PhDs, the dissertation may be 3 articles that are somehow sutured together. They may come out of collaborative work. They may have a digital character. As the humanities education develops into the future in response to a broadening of graduate student perspectives, it's important for us to rethink what it is that we expect for in the dissertation. There's no doubt that the core of the dissertation, extended research, an argument based on extended thoughtfulness, that will remain. The question is, what form does this product take? Now, I imagine that in the humanities program of the future, Students will come in passionate about their material, eager to continue their research and their learning, but maybe if we expose to students the full range of career opportunities, some are going to decide, you know what, I don't want to have that career in the university. I want to go into secondary school teaching, or I want to go into one of those IT jobs, or etc. Then maybe it would be appropriate to have a final project, a dissertation, that is more tailored to that alternative environment. Time to degree. The median time to degree in the humanities, that is time spent in graduate school altogether, is around 9 years in the United States. That's a long time. That's a long time in particular if we keep in mind the shakiness of the academic job market. It's not as if you stick around for 9 years and then you're guaranteed tenure track. If that were the case, I wouldn't be giving this talk. But that's not the case, and it may be the opposite. That is, the students who are taking too long are the ones who aren't getting the tenure track jobs. I believe that the lengthy time to degree is something we have to recognize as a problem, and is grounds for departments to rethink their programs, rethink how the programs are structured and managed, and ask, are there ways that we can just be more expeditious in completion of the degree? The degrees in the natural sciences and social sciences are all shorter in time than in the humanities. The only area where the median is longer is in education, and I believe that's because education degree recipients are typically working in K through 12 environments as they work toward their degree. So it's a very different environment. Time to degree is costly. It's costly in terms of institutional resources. It's costly in terms of the institutional resource of faculty attention, but it's also very, very costly in terms of the living situation of graduate students, many of whom end up in a kind of limbo in terms of their own life planning until the degree is completed. So I see this as a very, very urgent problem that we have to address. Now, it may seem counterintuitive if, on the one hand, I'm arguing that we should recognize careers outside of the academy, and that we, the task force, also argue for strengthening the teaching preparation component of graduate education. But I don't think it's a contradiction at all. When I've invited back former Ph.D. students who have gone on into careers outside of the academy, not only do they not regret having had the opportunity to study the material they love, they say again and again that one of the most transferable skills that they acquired in their time in the university was as teaching assistants. When they learned how to go into a classroom, how to present material to students, how to engage with students, and above all, to understand how students learn. Because even in the private sector, for better or for worse, our working lives are made up of meetings, and the ability to run a meeting, to understand what people are not understanding, to try to get complex material across, this is what you learn as a TA, and it can serve you well in all sorts of environments. It's crucial that we not lose this component. You all know that there's been a sea change in the education discussion in the United States in the past 10 years, with so much important public attention to the question of the effectiveness of teaching. This began in K-12, but it is certainly spreading on into undergraduate education as well. No one can succeed today on the job market without having a strong teaching profile, and therefore, this is going to have to remain, indeed, be amplified as a component of PhD training. So this is another core recommendation of the program, expanding professionalization opportunities. This is the para-curriculum that I was talking about before. I don't expect departments of German, departments of English, departments of French to start teaching management courses, But I do think that it's important for the graduate students in these programs to have opportunities within the university to learn about the kinds of skills that are often dual purpose. That is, that could work well in the academy, in careers in the academy, and outside the academy as well. I want my graduate students who go on into academic careers to be able to become leaders in academic careers, that is, department chairs and deans. I think they ought to be able to hit the ground running if they knew how to read a budget. Currently, we don't teach that to graduate students. We don't teach them anything about how the university operates. If we're introducing them into the academic sector, well, let's introduce them to the real industrial character of the academy and have them understand how the processes of university governance work. But if they can read a budget for an academic department, they can also read a budget in the private sector too. So this is another skill set that students should take with them no matter where they go. Now, where you get that skill set, where you get the skill set in reading budgets, where you get the skill set in technology, again, not necessarily in my German department, but students should take advantage of the whole university. Should take advantage of courses outside of their silo and paracurricular opportunities in various venues. One of the glories of scholarship is the opportunity to specialize. There's this question that I have that I really want to drill down on. But that logic of specialization is demonically dialectical, and what that means is that it has a downside too. It can make us narrow. And it's very, very comfortable for us scholars to stay inside our silos. That's not good for us, and it's certainly not good for graduate students. Graduate students should be encouraged by their faculty to make use of the whole university. What we've heard too often is that faculty want to hold on to the graduate students, corral them into the local unit. That's not good. The report calls on faculty to open the gates. And as I've said before, validate diverse career outcomes. It's been a long time that graduate students in the humanities have been going on to do other things. When we try to find out where students are, not in their first placement 5 years out, but 10 years out or 15 years out, where they're spending their careers, a lot of them aren't professors. And that can be for the good. It's for the good in the sense that they've found rewarding and lucrative opportunities, but it's also good from the standpoint of those of us who want to see humanistic, academic values disseminated throughout society. We have to say that this is a good thing and not convey to graduate students the message that this is just a plan B. So what we're talking about is a culture change. We're talking about some structural changes in the programs of graduate education and doctoral programs. Why this can happen? Well, we have to face the fact that the academic job market no longer will support the notion that it's exclusively the academy that should be the target. Remember the stats I showed you from last year's DLCL graduates. But this can happen, we know, because the reforms that we call for in the MLA report are already underway. I think the really important part of the report is not so much what we wrote, but what colleagues from around the country wrote in the appendix, where they describe reforms that are already being undertaken, and there's a section there about what's going on at Davis as well, and I'm grateful for that. Time to degree, in fact, is coming down slowly. People have been hammering on this for a long time. I think people are understanding that you can spend too long in the university. But for this really to take effect, for this to take effect in a way that will guarantee a productive and fertile future for humanities education in the university, it's going to need dedication on the part of faculty, and it's going to require leadership on the part of the university in general. I'm optimistic because I know these are changes that are already underway. I'm optimistic because I believe strongly in the value of opportunities for advanced study in the humanities, but we're going to have to work hard at this for quite some time until we get it right. Thank you.
I get to be in the middle. Oh, great. Do you want to start? So thank you very much. I'll serve as the moderator, and I think the pattern, as David explained, was that we'll have a little bit of a conversation, then we'll open up to questions. John, would you like to begin?
Sure. There are bright spots in Humanities PhD, and I'm wondering how you think about the unevenness that results. There are fields, one thinks of rhetoric and composition, media studies, the languages that are in demand like Arabic and Mandarin that are doing very well. How does the MLA report, how do you think about that unevenness and what we should be, how we should respond to the way that some departments really struggle to place their PhD students and others just simply do not?
The report itself doesn't address this unevenness in humanities education, but there certainly is that range of discrepancy across the sector. My impression is that there are growth fields like the ones you've mentioned that respond to changing student interest. Rhetoric and composition, media studies in particular. I believe there's a strong interest in fields like creative writing as well. My impression is that undergraduates today are not exclusively career-focused as such, but they want to engage in knowledge acquisition in a way that allows them to be productive rather than primarily receptive. That is, they want to be able to have a class that gives them something that they can do rather than something that they only assimilate. For me as a faculty member, that means that I should think about learning goals in terms of skill sets that students acquire in the course of the quarter and in the course of the degree. From the outside, that might not look that different, but it's a very different way to think about a course on the undergraduate or the graduate level. Graduate level, I might typically give a literary historical course on such and such a period or such and such a genre because it's an important piece of the field that students should have an opportunity to study. But I could also think about that same course in terms of a relevant skill that the student should acquire. I could think about, well, this is a course where we're going to talk about how to write an article. And the field that we're going to pursue this on is that genre, is that literary historical chapter. That's an example of a shift from material coverage to skill set building. And I think some of the fields that you mentioned are just more focused on skill set building. And that relates what I was trying to get at with that formula of programs meeting student needs rather than my research interests.
So, Russell, you described a complex there's so many different moving parts, and I'm fascinated by just thinking of how the different pressures work. On the one hand, I sometimes wonder whether the increase in length of time in the humanities PhD is that in many, many programs, students simply have to teach every quarter in order to support themselves. But then there's also, on the other end, the fact that I think there are rising expectations for what it takes to be successful on the job market. I'll just observe that, a generation ago, we would not have looked to someone who completed his or her PhD, someone who already had published articles. Now when I look at job applications, I'm stunned. In fact, I think they ought to take my position. They've got so much published. So I wonder if you could tease that apart.
Okay. Well, there are two pieces in there: the teaching element and the job expectations. Right? On the teaching element, it was very difficult for the task force to get the right formulations because of the diversity of institutions in the United States, in the United States and Canada, for that matter. There's not one formula that's going to work for all institutions. I've spoken already about how important I believe teaching experience is, and not just teaching experience, but learning about teaching. It's not just about time in the classroom, but it's also about those pedagogy seminars or some other title for them, where there's an opportunity to really think about current research on learning. That's crucial. But you're absolutely right that in some institutions, in public institutions, because of funding structures, graduate students have to teach an awful lot. What we recommend is that there should be adequate funding to make degrees completable within 5 years. This doesn't mean that everyone's going to do it, but that programs should rethink how much time they're asking of students to take out of their lives before they can complete. I think that students at many public institutions may be teaching too much. At the same time, there's an alternative problem in the privates, where I have seen this. There's been a race to the bottom in terms of how much teaching is expected of graduate students in those programs, because the assumption is graduate students don't want to teach, graduate students shouldn't teach, and if we offer less teaching, we'll be more competitive in attracting those graduate students to our programs. I think now, I speak now on the basis of having been a member of many job search committees. I think students come out of privates with too little teaching experience, with weak teaching profiles, and you can't gussy them up with a good philosophical statement if you haven't been in the classroom enough. So there are problems there. Part of them has to do with the structure of higher education in general, but yeah, that's teaching. In terms of job qualifications, the expectation of publication and the like, yeah, that's a reality. It's not that long ago when faculty would say, should we really encourage graduate students to publish before they get their PhD? And now it's almost now it is expected in order to be successful on the job market. What we've done, in a sense, from the standpoint of the hiring institution, is expect of incoming graduate students, of fresh PhDs, what we used to expect assistant professors to accomplish. So we've really sort of pushed the burden onto the graduate student. I don't see how that can be rolled back, but it can be responded to if the graduate programs would restructure in order to provide the students with the appropriate support so that they could publish before they complete. And that's the model that I was suggesting before, thinking of the graduate seminar not only as the moment where I cover 19th century novels, but where I build in intentionally and systematically, step by step, how you turn this limited research project into an article and have it submitted 6 months out. At Stanford, in my department, we long had a qualifying paper as part of the process from first year to second year. So we restructured that. The students write the qualifying paper, which is an enhanced seminar paper over the summer under the with the guidance of a faculty member. But the expectation is that by December, it is supposed to grow into an article, into a manuscript that can be submitted to a professional journal. So we're taking responsibility to prepare students to the job market that exists.
I wonder if I could ask you to think, or to talk a little bit about how you're thinking about the wider PhD picture. You had comparisons across the disciplines. The sciences are famously, well, not as famously as the humanities, but under a great deal of pressure. The National Science Foundation numbers are stagnant at best year to year at this point. How does one think about PhD across the disciplines, given that for someone studying in a biology department, as much as an English department these days, it is at least a certain likelihood that you'll be doing work at some point in a field other than the one that you've trained for?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of problems in this field that you've just outlined. I think that if there's a sector of higher education where one might argue genuinely overproduction, it's in the life sciences, and the statistics will bear that out. And that's why you also see in the life sciences this proliferation of the multiple postdocs. And again, one could think of, well, that's great. There are all these opportunities after you get the PhD to have employment within higher education in the field that you love. But it also means those multiple postdocs is that you're deferring for 2 years, for 4 years, the possibility of entry into something like the job security of a tenure-track position. So that's the postdoc trap, and I'm wary that the humanities may be sliding in that direction. Every new postdoc sounds like a good thing, right? You're getting new PhDs who haven't landed the tenure track job yet, and you're giving them an opportunity to develop skills. It's good on the individual basis. It's something that we should watch and wonder about whether it's also causing some damage. I think that across the board, it's important to hold on to the PhD as the marker of accomplished extended research, and the character of that research, of course, will vary across the university, across disciplines, but that's what defines it. I think maybe for the humanities, that formula could imply ratcheting back a bit on the scope of coursework and moving students into their research projects more rapidly. Now, this would be analogous to the nature of the doctoral degree in other parts of the Anglosphere. It would also respond to statistics that the American Academy of Arts and Sciences just came out with. Some of you may have seen this. It was published a week ago, 2 weeks ago, showing that the difference in time, the greater length required for humanities is, according to their stats at least, not about longer times in dissertation, but longer time in coursework and examination. So 2 years for the natural sciences, 4 years for the humanists, and we humanists have to ask whether that's necessary or whether it's not a function of certain habits, certain funding structures, certain expectations that we're just accepting uninterrogated.
Can I ask one thing about that report? I mean, like with time to degree, it also makes me wonder whether students who are coming out of undergraduate in the humanities are just not prepared to do the kind of work that they're being asked to do, which would be another way of explaining why there's so much more coursework in humanities disciplines.
That would be one response. Another response would be to to clarify what's going on in those undergraduate programs and ratchet up expectations there. Or it could be, perhaps, to recognize that the fields are changing substantively, and the under-preparation of incoming graduate students, what appears to be the under-preparation, might just be a reflection of changed expectations on their part, which is a mismatch with the existing curricular offering by the faculty. Now that's a bold statement, but I do think that it's reflective of what's changed so dramatically in the course of the past decades. What counted as immovable canonic expectations 20 years ago, they're gone. It's disappeared. So maybe they're not underprepared, but they're underprepared for the expectations that a faculty trained 20 years ago still has. Now, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of that, but I think we should entertain that possibility as well. But I want to come back to the issue of that you raised before about the PhD education across the university. The message of the MLA report, with which I agree, is that it's time for faculty in our departments just to rethink what we're doing. Doesn't mean that everything is wrong, but let's just interrogate. Let's just ask what might be done differently. We shouldn't be afraid of that. Now, one way you can do that is imminently, just look at our texts. Another way is comparatively. And comparatively, by that I mean, well, let's look at what's going on elsewhere in the university. Colleagues elsewhere are comfortable awarding PhDs a year earlier than we are. How come? They're comfortable with a different notion of the dissertation. How come? Doesn't mean we have to adopt the model, but let's just see if we can come up with a good answer. What I think is a crucial piece of all of this is the different structure of, well, especially advising, which is at the it's an important component of teaching. I had an eye-opening discussion with a great colleague in earth sciences a couple of years ago, and we were talking about how we work with our graduate students. And she told me that, she admitted she's at one end of the spectrum, but not atypical, that she only publishes collaboratively with her graduate students. The humanities, it's once in a century that faculty publish collaboratively with their graduate students. Should we change that? I mean, we could change that. We, faculty, would just have to start doing it. And I've started doing it. It's not the only way I publish, but it's one way to publish, and it's a learning opportunity for the graduate student. It's a learning opportunity for me. We've worked together on a few occasions, different graduate students, and we submit articles, and sometimes, as I said today earlier, we get kicked in the teeth and get rejected, and sometimes we're accepted. That's good, and that's a way that every humanities faculty could change the institution through his or her practice on a day-by-day basis. Start trying to collaborate. Learning how to collaborate for the graduate student is then a crucial skill. We in the humanities sometimes admire excessively a model of Faustian isolation, right? That is the only way. The only way to learn is by ourselves. We can learn by ourselves. We can also learn in discussion and collaboration and in sharing. So let's try that out. Now, the other point that I learned from her, which is which would be an even more radical change in the habitus of the humanities professor, had to do with advising. She said she meets with each of her advisees, each of her doctoral advisees, once a week, one-on-one. We know that humanities faculty meeting with their doctoral advisees, especially at the dissertation level, may be much more infrequent than that. I think graduate students can get lost. I think faculty members can get lost. I think it's important to have a more frequent face-to-face. What's more, she told me that she meets with her group of advisees, so the cohort of students who are writing the dissertations under her under her tutelage. She meets with that group on a regular basis once a week. That group, to my knowledge, that kind of cohort, that way of bringing students together, doesn't exist in the humanities. Now, graduate students may have working groups. They should. Some of them are departmentally sanctioned. Some of them are ad hoc. That's all great. But the notion of a faculty member's cohort of graduate students meeting together, I don't think this happens. And I think it should, or it could, so I'm trying it out with mine. And I haven't gone to the once a week cold turkey, but I'm doing the once a month now, and it's working. I mean, I think students are learning from each other, and I think they feel a responsibility to present progress or to present problems, to present roadblocks to me on a regular basis. This is not a revolution. It's a dramatic tweak of what we do.
I wonder if I could ask a question that addresses a question that often comes up in discussion of the humanities, which is the status of the humanities in our culture. But I want to try it directly related to this idea that humanities PhDs would and do have skills that will lead them to take on all sorts of positions. It's, as you showed, it's happening already, and many of the PhD students themselves want to be trained, whether or not they want to share that with their advisors or not. That's something we need to take on. But we know that there are lots of possibilities. In Germany, it's just very common for people to have a doctorate and be the CEO of this company and that. In fact, it's almost de rigueur. My question is, what do we need to do more generally in our culture so that people who are hiring for those positions will look at humanities PhDs and understand what those PhDs will be bringing to those positions?
Well, I think the arguments that one can make are pretty clear. I've made them already in terms of the ability to engage in extended research, the ability to be extensively thoughtful, the ability to use language, the ability to make evidence-based arguments in a verbal as opposed to a numeracy world. I think that's all valid. The capacity to have a historical reflectiveness and so forth. Right? That's all about the value of the humanities. But what your question does is point me to something that I think is vital to be taken up by institutions. Now, in the report, we finger the DGS, the Director of Graduate Studies, in departments to be the point person for initiating change. We talked about the placement officer. Now, some departments have individual faculty members who sort of manage the graduate students going on the job market. Not all departments do that. Larger ones do. I think that in order to promote this notion of humanities graduates, humanities PhDs playing a role in large society, universities should take up effectively a marketing campaign and make the case to the public. The individual department chair, the individual placement officer can try to do that. She should collaborate with the career placement, the Career Development Center, or universities have this, I'm not sure what it's called here. But we're professors of German or English. I mean, what do I know from the IT world? I think we need professionals in the university to be tasked with making the case that humanities PhDs have a place in government, in not-for-profit, and in the private sector. We have to recognize that this has been happening, but it's been under the cover of darkness. It's something. It's a secret that we don't talk about. We have to learn how to talk about it effectively in order to change expectations on the part of future employers.
Don't we need actually the captains of industry, the people who are leading those high-tech companies to be making that case? It seems rather self-serving if the university makes it and humanists make it themselves. I'm being a little skeptical here.
Well, and they used to. The Carnegies and Rockefellers would carry water for the humanities on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Yes, but I guess my first response to that is, what's wrong with self-serving? Seriously, if we, the university, are committed to humanities education, and we're also committed to serving graduate student needs, then we should promote that. Now, it's not strange for universities to have communications offices that present the university to the public, and part of that task should be about presenting the value of humanities education for work in government in Sacramento, in industry in Silicon Valley, across the globe.
Sure.
So I think universities should take on that responsibility. I don't want to let departments off the hook. Right? I think the DGS and the placement officer have a lot on their plate, and they should be getting to work already.
Well,
they shouldn't be here because they should be getting to work.
I don't want to shirk our responsibility. I think it has to be both and.
Yeah.
John, should we?
But let me just add, in order to get the captains of industry to do this, we're going to have to make that case first. And I think that the captains of industry will eventually sign on. For a couple of years, we had a program at Stanford that was a kind of pilot in this direction. It was called Bibliotech, a little cute. Biblio, humanities, tech, as in technology, opportunities for humanities PhDs in the IT world. And we got people together on both sides. And at first, it was just a lot of glaring across the table, but eventually the ice melted, and there was some frank talk. And what we humanists learned is that in that IT world, it's a lot like the university. Lots of people with advanced degrees, lots of smart people, but it's a highly educated community that was, at that point at least, aware that the range of intelligences that it had within itself was limited. And they were open to talking about humanities possibilities within their hiring agenda, and you saw the result for the DLCL. Twice as good as for tenure-track jobs. That's an accomplishment. They also had some criticisms of humanities PhDs from which we learned. Their criticism of humanities PhDs was, as smart as they are, as articulate as they are, they don't necessarily know how to work on teams. I think that we can build in team work skills into our programs without any radical revolution, just like I was talking about a seminar before that would be oriented toward how to write an article. While I covered the 19th century novel, I could imagine a course on 20th century poetry. So I'm doing my coverage job, focused on teamwork. And in that course, instead of each student writing his or her own separate seminar paper, we divide it up and have people write different pieces of some collaborative work. That's something that is not typically part of education in the humanities. It is typically part of what goes on in, say, in engineering. And I don't think there's anything wrong in our learning from educational practices elsewhere in the university.
I think we should ask our colleagues and all the audience if they have questions. We can, of course, jump in later, but I'm sure that there are questions. Please, and there's some microphones here.
The MLA newsletter just published last week, I guess, the number of jobs that were posted this year. I think it was something around 800. Now, we know many of them will not be funded. Many of them are temporary adjunct jobs. But at public universities, English departments enroll graduate students to teach freshman composition, and they turn out more graduate students than there are jobs available. how do we solve that problem?
It's not so much that they turn out more graduate students than there are jobs available in the economy. We turn out more graduate students than there are jobs available as for tenure-track positions. Right? So the argument is to recognize that there are other kinds of jobs where these skill sets can be utilized. This has been the case for a long time, but it's something that we've tended not to talk about. Graduate students interested in other kinds of careers are fearful that their advisors might drop them if they talk about it. So the answer, I believe, is not in shrinking the cohorts or closing departments. The answer is recognizing that the world is bigger than academic positions.
Andy.
Hi. I'm a scientist, and some years ago I tried to do a project with a humanist, and we made some progress. But one of the things I discovered is what you just mentioned, talking to your colleague from Earth Sciences. We had come up with a project idea, and I said, "Oh, I have just the master's student to work on it." And her response was, "Oh, that's right, you work with students." So there was this clearly expectation that faculty and students don't collaborate. And I think this is part of the time to degree issue. In other words, I don't expect a student when they start to be able to run their own project, to do their own research. I mentor them and actually give them a project to start with. And the expectation is, as time goes on, by the time they get to their qualifying exam, they will have the critical skills to understand how to do the research, and that they will then take the project in some direction themselves and complete it. And when they're finished, they have the skill set. I mean, they are a full-fledged researcher. And I think perhaps the long delay that humanists are facing is that they're expecting the students to be completely full-fledged, capable researchers before they can move on to their dissertation work. So perhaps this would be helpful, although I think it may be, obviously it's a big change in culture.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, that's a clear articulation of an implication of what I was saying. I'm not arguing that humanists should adopt full-scale, 100% the habitus of natural scientists, but we can learn from a different way of interacting with graduate students, including forms of closer collaboration.
David.
Thank you. When I listen to a list of what you have in mind, I like almost everything one by one, but I struggle a little with putting it all together into a 5-year package. As you surely know, I mean, the tendency has been to streamline the PhD program anyway, and that's been going on since the previous dip in the statistics in 93, 94. So a lot of people have a perception that dissertations are getting shorter, which by and large they are. 3 chapters passes in many places. Language requirements have been trimmed. Exams have been streamlined and sometimes even disappeared. Pre-qualification course numbers have been trimmed. All these things are happening with the aim of minimizing time to degree, and I think that's working to a certain extent. I love what you say about the paracurriculum. I love all the other things, the bells and whistles that go along with a good life and a well-rounded experience in every possible job market. But I wonder how you're going to put it all together. I could see losing a course here and there. I could see giving credit to somebody taking a class in the business school. I absolutely like the paracurriculum because it doesn't interfere with the curriculum. But I'm worried that you, in trying to package something all together, in this very utopian 5 years, I think, for anything other than fully funded students, we're going to actually please nobody. And I'm particularly worried because outside of your own very local experience with the IT industry, we don't know what that market is that we're preparing people for. We know that there's a digital humanities sector, and that's already making its way into departments through hiring and through courses taught and all those things. We know there's academic administration. But beyond that, we don't actually know what the market's going to be in 5 or 10 years. And I'm very leery of making fixed changes to requirements and leaving people satisfying, in fact, no market at the end of the day.
Well, it's difficult to know what the job market is going to be in the future. One start would be to get a better understanding of what the job market has been in the past. That is to say, it would be good for departments to be able to understand where their own graduates are 5 years, 10 years out. And I suspect you'll find that significant numbers are not in the academy, or significant numbers are not in research universities if they are still within the higher education sector. What are the implications of that in terms of the structure of the preparation that we offer graduate students? Now, what is the phrase? Past performance is not an indication of future or whatever. So I can't predict either. But I'm pretty confident in predicting that the number of tenure track openings is not going to quadruple in the next 5 years, and quadruple is what we would need to obviate the track into adjuncts. Because if it's 75%, right, we have to quadruple. So it's going to be a different kind of job market. Now, the argument to push back on the time to degree involves a reflection on the status of the graduate student in year 5 versus in year 9, going on to a job market that may not offer an academic opportunity. And it's my belief that if they're going to have to make that transition, better at age 28, 29 than at age 34, 35. If they're going to have to go into an entry-level position, better at age 28 than at age 34. If we're going to maintain programs that require the long haul, then we're putting graduate students, I think, in a terrible position when they get out. So maybe there is some pushing back on the expectation of what would pertain to new hires. I think that, as I said in passing, there's an indication that students who spend longer aren't more competitive on the academic job market. It's that cohort who get done in 6 years or less, or 7 or 6 years. Now, what's the causation? What's the correlation here? It might just be that those are the really driven students, and they're hired not because they're done, but because they're driven. It may be because it may be the fact that students who take longer have life circumstances that just slowed them down, and that life can be unfair. But the hiring committee isn't going to pay attention to that inequity. I think we just have to be frank about how the job market works and what kind of preparation we can offer for what kind of job market, a narrowly conceived one or a broadly understood one.
I know that we don't have all the time for the reception. However, I know there are 2 people waiting to ask questions. Maybe we could do those 2 and make them fairly quick, and then we have, of course, more discussion later.
So I'm a graduate student.
Great.
In a PhD program after doing a master's program. And I wanted to sort of just put out there that the job security that used to exist everywhere 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that doesn't exist. We don't have one job anymore. So I am also, sort of to echo some things that have been said, slightly skeptical about changing preparation for a job that we don't know what the market looks like for a new model, because right now, who knows what I'm going to do in 10 years? I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do in 20 years. If you told me 10 years ago I'd be here, sure. And so I think that there needs to be some recognition of the fact that students also may be staying in because they have funding and they can't get a job. And so you can stay in and stretch your funding out. Trying to get a job in 2008 and 2009 sucked. Trying to get a job now sucks a little less, but not a lot. And so I feel like there needs to be, in these ideas, recognition of the fact that not all graduate students are 24, and that job markets, whether they're in the academy or not, there aren't job security anymore the way there used to be.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right, and it's a terrible situation. The declining percentage of job security, that is the tenure track jobs, and the adjunctification of higher education. In that context, I think it's all the more important to provide current graduate students with this broadened professionalization opportunities in order to give them a kind of mobility on the job market. Now, it could be that the student receives the PhD and doesn't get the tenure track job, and then faces the possibility of an adjunct position without the job security, and is so committed to teaching that says, you know what, I'll take that. But I want my graduate students to understand that it's okay if they do something else too, and that there have been aspects of their training, the para-curriculum that I mentioned before, that will equip them to move out of the academy. We should structure programs in a way to give students a way out of the adjunct trap if that's the structure of the job market that they face. In the meantime, I think, yeah, we should advocate for more tenure track positions, but I don't think that we're going to get enough tenure track positions to meet the whole backlog and future PhD production.
Margie, maybe the last question.
I'll try to be brief. I want to thank you, Russell, for the report and all the work you've done. And I'm not saying this just because I have an investment in the MLA, which I do for another 6 weeks, and then I'm free, but also because it seems to me the overall effect of the report, which has already occasioned much debate here and elsewhere, and I get a lot of questions about it, asks for us to think of a larger question, which is, where are the points of ethical agency for the faculty, for the tenured faculty? Mm-hmm. Because that's what we're really talking about here, as the people who have some power to put some pressure on at various different places. And when you started, you mentioned that there was the argument that the market was terrible, we weren't placing students in 2008. That has happened, of course, many other years in the 35 years I've been in the profession. And so the counter argument is to just reduce your programs, because that's the reality, that's the market. Your argument is that we should push back on that and do so by making some changes in the way we do things. And my question, and I don't have an answer to it, is really, aren't there some other ways that we can do that that would not let us off the hook so easily? It seems to me that what Ralph asked you earlier was, haven't we, as a tenured faculty who are able to talk to, and in some cases are, the administration of our various institutions, we have allowed the rise in expectations for the beginning assistant professor to become 2 articles. That's happened. It didn't just happen. Mm-hmm. We have some, this is really a question about systems and where you can push at them. We have also allowed the teaching in the public university to become extremely essential to the way we conduct our undergraduate majors. We, in the English department, simply couldn't survive without graduate students doing work. And it's not because they're funded, it's because they're actually working full-time, pretty close to full-time teaching, doing jobs that we need them to do, or else we would really have to change a lot of things. And the third thing is the one that just came up. We didn't But we could have, and we still could, really push back against the massive transfer of labor from tenure-track positions to non-tenure track positions, creating so-called the new precariat, I think it's called. But that didn't just happen. That had a lot of people making some decisions. And there are all sorts of small kinds of incentives and possibilities for change. When I was sitting here talking to my chancellor, it's something that was provoked when it seems as if, yes, we could definitely meet with our graduate students once a week. And I said, wow, I don't get any credit for any. I get no teaching credit for my advisees at all. That's all an overload. And Linda said, well, I always got credit for each and every graduate student. Now that's engineering, I'm in English. She said we could fix that. She said that. I'm going to hold you to that. But what I'm wondering, and I guess it's really a version of what I think was Ralph's question, which is whether or not the faculty, the tenured faculty, couldn't be asked to do more, really do more. I don't want the university to hire a professional to say why it is that the content of my PhD, as opposed to an MA, which I see as skills building, what is it about the PhD that makes it valuable? Why should a CEO either become one or want to hire one? For that, you have to have people who have been doing the research, who have done the drilling down. It's not just skills, it's knowledge. How is that transferable? I don't know, it's hard. But you can't put that off onto some professional who doesn't have the subject matter under her or his belt, and who probably isn't all that interested or passionately committed to it. So I guess my question is really, are there some ways that the faculty could work a little bit harder and maybe make themselves a little more uncomfortable to change some of these things?
The answer is yes, but before I get to that, let's get some real business done here. In terms of credit for advising graduate students at Stanford, the English department has an elaborate system of points, and for X number of advisees, they get some kind of course relief. I'm not lucky enough to be in the English department, so I can't give you the details on that, but I know that my colleagues in the foreign languages are trying to imitate that. So it's, the idea is to make labor that is otherwise invisible visible, and find some mode of crediting that within the university. I think more focused advising is a big piece of the problem in the humanities. Yes, we tenured faculty in humanities could be more effective with our agency, and I think we should also talk about our culpability in this whole situation. You talked about the transition of who teaches what. I remember the former executive director of the Modern Language Association, Phyllis Franklin, talked about a Faustian bargain, came up twice here, I'm a German professor, that the faculty entered into administration over the past decades. There's been a migration of tenure-line faculty out of composition in English, out of foreign language teaching in those fields, and the response was not to hire more faculty, but to hire more adjuncts. There's been a reduction of teaching load, which has not led to more tenure-line positions, but to more adjunct positions. I mean, we have met the enemy, we have seen the enemy, and they are us. Now, that's not the whole story, but I think there's a part of it that we can't solve this 100% on our own by ourselves, but I think that we faculty can do a whole lot more, both in terms of advocacy, in terms of kind of census of what our departments currently require. I'm not talking about changing the structure of these programs radically. I've used the word a couple of times, tweaking, just figuring out what's working and what's just traditional. And we need that traditional stuff if it's costing a couple of years of graduate student lives. And then I think each of us can think of each of us, tenured faculty with job security, can think about what we do as ways to change the institution. And the examples I gave are my deciding to try to publish collaboratively, to figure out how that works in the humanities, and to teach collaboratively. I do that as well with graduate students, not shuffling off labor onto them, but giving them different kinds of teaching opportunities. Now that has a particular calculus in the private university where I think graduate students don't teach enough, but my point now is that, yeah, absolutely, we should do more to change the situation.
I think the script has the Chancellor having the last word.
You've mentioned that we prepare our graduate students for faculty positions, and this is true not really for the humanities, but this is true for all other disciplines. We have heard that from our graduate students who say that they do not want to share their desire to follow a different path from their advisors with their advisors because they normally get upset. And so how do we we faculty change the way we view the role of the PhD in the society and our roles in educating our graduate students, and how do we help them develop the skills even for professions we do not know? Because it is true, I mean, I will take my field, which is engineering, that the majority of the engineering faculty have never practiced engineering. They have become faculty right after school. So we are trying to prepare our students for professions we do not know. And that, I think, is an issue at times. But it's an important issue because our students do have the need to be ready for a much broader spectrum of professions. In fact, statistics have shown that across the board, in terms of the various disciplines, only a small percentage of our faculty, maybe 20% of our, graduate students, 20% of our graduate students become faculty after they graduate.
Yeah. There are two issues. One is the awareness of the broad range of potential career paths. The other is the access to the diverse skill sets, many of which are transferable and of dual purpose, that they could work within the academy, but they can work without it. My example, again, is teaching that I talked about before. There are these two separate challenges, and there are at least three separate publics. There's our faculty colleagues, many of whom are not necessarily on board with the idea of the broader career path. At least there's the perception that they're not on board. We don't, as I said before, I'm not sure how often it is the case that faculty drop their graduate students, but there's the anxiety that that might take place. Then there's the broader public, right? Who's going to make the case to industry that humanities PhDs have a place there? And Margie, I agree with you. Of course, it's we who are passionate about these fields who should make this case. But I think the university should take up that responsibility and devote some resources to making that case as well, just as the university makes the case to the public about everything that it does. I think it's good that it makes the case to the public, not only at a public university. But then there's the public of the graduate students. And that's what I want to focus on in my last remark here. How do we communicate to graduate students the character of the job market and the validity of multiple outcomes? We have to have better statistics. We have, and that's why I would call on departments, but I'd also call on the university to track this. It's not that easy to do the tracking, especially if you want it updated year to year. Some staff time has to be devoted to this. So that when graduate students apply to the department, you can say, well, over the past 10 years, this is where people have ended up. Right now, it's very hard for me to give accurate information about that. We have to get that data. But we also have to make graduate students aware that faculty will support them in whatever career path they follow. Now, whatever career path they follow as they succeed in the program, of course, but that it's okay to decide in year 2 that you want to go into high school teaching. I think high school teaching is important. It's okay if in year 3 you decide, you know what, you don't want to work here, you're going to want to work in a not-for-profit. I mean, there was that terrible discussion last year about judging programs in terms of the annual income of the alumni. This would mean that the program that generates hedge fund managers is absolutely better than the program that generates people who are going into inner city teaching. Right? This is not the kind of value that we want to promote. But in order to promote alternative values, we have to have some data, right? And we have to say that it's okay to go into inner city teaching, even if you have your PhD on Shakespearean tragedy. What's wrong with that? I think it's a good thing. But we should say that, and universities should promote that. I believe that one way to do this with addressing the graduate student community, but also addressing the faculty and the university community at large, is really easy. And that is in the speaker series that our departments and programs regularly host, where we invite in colleagues from across the country with their important recent research. I mean that sincerely. I'm not trying to diminish that we make space for PhD recipients, perhaps our own alumni or not, who have gone on to do other things. And they can talk about that. They can talk about how they made that transition. They can talk about how they found that job in the not-for-profit world. Because it's not immediately obvious to me, with my background in the academy, how to do that. Put a couple of those in the speaker series and thereby validate to the graduate student audience and to our colleagues and to our hesitant colleagues, our esteemed and hesitant colleagues, that it's okay to do these other things because it's good work.
Thank you. And so before we formally thank our speaker with our hands, I want to tell everyone that we have a wonderful reception waiting for us out in the lobby, and I hope that the rich conversation will continue. So thank you so much. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.